You're listening to the download edition of World Business Report. On Tuesday, the 3rd of February, I'm Susanna Streeter. The Spanish political party hoping to repeat what's happened in Greece.
The austerity policies, they are not only unfair, they are inefficient. They have failed. So it is time to talk, it is time to sit down, and it is time to explore alternatives.
But could there be a backlash against countries trying to renegotiate their debts? Plus, BP says it's scaling back its exploration plans because of the lower oil price.
All the oil majors are not in agreement as to where they think the oil price is going to be in the short term. I think BP is probably of the more negative.
And the 1 million people in Ivory Coast who officially don't exist.
If I had my papers, I would have good health. I can win my life back. But without them, what can I do? Who are you? You're like an animal.
That's all coming up. It's a movement that's spreading across Europe. From Portugal to Spain, from Italy to Greece, an increasing number of people seem determined to throw off the straitjacket of austerity. The Greeks have voted in the anti-austerity party Syriza. Its government is now trying to persuade international lenders to renegotiate its massive €320 billion debt burden. Meanwhile, in Spain, Podemos, a party that didn't even exist until the beginning of last year, has now edged to the top of the polls with their slogan, "Si se puede, yes we can." At the weekend, tens of thousands of Spaniards came out onto the streets of Madrid to support its uncompromising message against austerity and corruption in Spanish politics. My colleague John Bithry spoke to the international spokesperson for Podemos, Pablo Bustindi, and asked him if Syriza's victory in Greece would help propel his party to electoral success.
Well, we have celebrated Syriza's victory, not simply for what it represents in terms of Greek politics, for the Greek people, but because we believe it can inaugurate a new political cycle in Europe. The austerity policies, they are not only unfair, they are inefficient. They have failed. So it is time to talk, it is time to sit down, and it is time to explore alternatives.
So you're confident that Syriza can solve all the problems of the Greek economy by not talking to the Troika, by throwing out austerity in Greece?
Absolutely not. I think Syriza has been very honest during the campaign, and Tsipras has been very honest with his people. The future is very complex. There will be a lot of difficulties and problems. We are in big trouble because of the policies that have taken us here, and we understand that the challenges are huge. But in the history of Europe, every single time that we have faced difficulties such as those that we are living in these days, we have solved them politically. We believe in building an alternative that will be democratic and that will bring back prosperity to the citizens of Europe.
So are you saying that Spain has not been electing democratically elected governments over the past few years to solve the crisis there?
Of course, we have been electing governments democratically, but the problem comes afterwards, when the representatives of the people who have been democratically elected, left-wing or right-wing, they tell their voters from day one after they are elected that they cannot apply their electoral programs because there is no alternatives, because there is no other option than applying policies that 5 years afterwards we have seen that they have failed, that all the problems that they were supposed to tackle and to try to solve, debt, inequality, poverty, unemployment, etc., all of those are worse now.
So what are you going to bring to Spain?
What we try to bring back to Spain is a notion of popular sovereignty. In democracy, when something doesn't work, democracy means that you can change it, that there is an alternative, and an alternative that you can express collectively, peacefully, and constructively. After a very long cycle of political desperation with the issues affecting the country, real difficulties that people are going through, problems of unemployment, of poverty, of inequality. In Spain, there has been a big debate to know last Christmas whether the public schools should remain open during the Christmas holidays. Why? Because there are tens of thousands of kids, of children, that only eat once per day in their schools. So that is not possible. That is not possible. Our country is the fourth economy in the Eurozone. It's a country that is rich, that has talent, that has capacities, that has wealth, but it's not well distributed. It is not well arranged. There is not a productive system that is working, and we are confined in this situation of desperation for a large majority of the people, whereas we have every single year more and more wealth accumulated in fewer and fewer hands.
You are 12 months old. You're extremely new. Are you going to be able to live up to what you promise and to do it in a professional way?
One thing is certain, and I think that people in Spain are recognizing it, is that we are very serious about it, and that what is moving us is not the interest of, making a career, of becoming professional politicians, but that we are actually and sincerely committed to a process of democratic change. The professional bankers and politicians that we should, in theory, trust have taken our continent to a situation of desperation. There are options that are raising in every single one of these countries that are the result of the inability of the political establishment to deal with the basic needs of their populations.
Pablo Bustindi from Podemos, hoping to mirror the success of Syriza, while the new Greek finance minister is on a tour of European capitals, aiming to win support from other governments for his plan to ease the country's debt burden. Yanis Varoufakis says he's seeking some smart debt engineering to reduce what Greece has to pay. After meeting private equity investors in London, he told the BBC that a new deal was essential to turn a new page for his nation.
When you are in a debt deflationary cycle, putting an end to it both benefits the population, brings it out of the clasps of increasing misery and hopelessness, and increases equity prices. Meeting with private investors here in London gave, I think, both sides, them and me, a great deal of optimism about the future.
So, with support for anti-austerity parties growing, European politics are changing. But could this signify the start of a new economic era in Europe too? Or could softer terms for Greece cause a backlash around the rest of Europe? Well, that's a question I put to Roger Bootle from Capital Economics.
I think that there would be a backlash in Middle and Northern Europe. This is a very difficult situation. You've got to have, I think, a balanced perspective. I've got enormous sympathy, actually, for Syriza and for Podemos in Spain. And that's ironic, really, coming from a pro-market, as you might say, apologist for capitalism. And I've got sympathy for them because of their honesty and their insight about understanding the essence of the problem that they're in. You simply can't go on like this. I mean, Europe is bleeding, frankly. It's collapsing. What's happened is we've had this idiotic idea foisted upon the continent of Europe, that's the euro, and we've had policies of self-defeating austerity foisted upon people. We can't go on like this. Now, I might quibble, in fact I do quibble with many of the policies of Syriza and Podemos, but you've got to admire the honesty. They're absolutely right. Now, at the same time, if you think about it from the point of view of, let's say, your honest German taxpayer who's been working hard, paying his taxes, and he sees some of the practices that have been going on in Greece, people not paying taxes, people retiring at 50 from the public service, gross maladministration in the public sector, how do you feel? You must feel really resentful about the fact that here you are, this money you've sent south is being written off. I'm afraid this is just a complete disaster created by Europe's political elites.
So you think then that as far as Podemos are concerned, that the professional bankers and politicians have taken the continent to a situation of desperation? That's what the spokesperson told the BBC.
I think there's no doubt that that is the case. What I think I find so striking and in some ways quite sad, but also very interesting about the position of Syriza and Podemos, as I understand it, is that neither of these parties is yet questioning the European aspect to all this. Both of them obviously want to remain in the EU, but also, as far as I can see, they want to remain in the euro. Now, from my perspective, it's the euro that has caused this problem. And I personally find it very difficult to see how these countries, and indeed Europe as a whole, can escape from this ghastly situation while the euro remains in place.
Well, Yanis Varoufakis, the new Greek finance minister, certainly seems to think so. He's been on this charm offensive around Europe, and he thinks that actually it could continue if only there was some smart debt engineering to reduce Greece's huge burden. In what form could this smart debt engineering be, and do you think it would be so smart?
Well, let's be clear about this. You know, if someone owes someone else some money, they're either going to pay it or they're not. If they do pay it, they lose. If they don't pay it, the creditor loses. That's simple and it's clear and it's honest. Now, what this stuff about smart engineering is all about is not actually doing anything to alter those fundamental points, the logic of arithmetic about debts and assets. It's actually all about appearance. It's about politics. So what has to happen here, if there's going to be a deal, is that somehow or other the honest German burger has got to be made to feel that he's not yet again pouring money down the tubes. And similarly in Greece, the Greek voters who've elected Syriza full of hope and in desperation about what's been happening recently have got to feel that they've won some sort of victory.
Roger Bootle from Capital Economics. Oil prices are going up. Yes, you did hear me correctly. After months of reporting a fall in the price of black gold, the price of crude oil has climbed back up slightly, with Brent crude now just above $56 a barrel. But despite these very small gains, the need for fundamental change in the oil industry is clear, and that was certainly the message from energy giant BP today. It released results earlier showing a dip in profits. It still made $2.2 billion in the last 3 months of 2014, but that was compared with $2.8 billion a year earlier. Now, in response to new challenging operating environments, it says it's cutting capital expenditure by almost a fifth over the next year, reducing exploration costs and postponing some projects. It's not that surprising. BP's boss, Bob Dudley, hinted at the World Economic Forum in Davos last week that he thought the lower oil price was here to stay for some time.
This is not a correction. This is a significant change in the industry that'll have wide-ranging effects on geopolitics and, of course, the energy industry itself. The reason, I think, is simply there is an oversupply right now. It has been built up and no one's willing to reduce production right now.
Well, I've been speaking to David Battersby, an analyst from Redmayne Bentley Stockbrokers. He told me that reducing expenditure doesn't necessarily mean further BP exploration projects will be ditched.
They are still making money, and a lot of it. It's just that the oil price rose significantly and has fallen back quite sharply in recent times because of OPEC, and then suddenly people are concerned that not just BP but Shell and Chevron, etc., are suffering badly at the hands of the low oil price.
What do you think the boss, Bob Dudley, means when he talks about a new reality of lower oil prices? Do you think we've hit rock bottom now? Do you think the price is going to stay just above $50 a barrel?
It would be very dangerous for anybody to say where the oil price is going to go. Bob Dudley is quite right that we have to reassess where we think the price is going to be. I think BP is probably of the more negative. We've seen it down to $45 a barrel in the short term. It's just peaked up recently because of concerns about the future of US production, which is exactly what OPEC were trying to get rid of.
So perhaps that strategy's not working, but as far as BP is concerned, the new reality also means that it's drastically cutting back on some of its investments in future years.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, they're all doing this. They're cutting back their expenditure by 23%. Shell only cut back by 4.5%. However, the reason they only cut back by a small amount was because they were 90% committed to this year's investments. So cutting back harshly was not such an option for them. What I think will happen is that as you cut back significantly, prices will start to fall quite significantly then for the consumer, and then of course demand will pick up, and then of course there won't be the investment made to actually provide the oil to meet the demand, and then they could ratchet up very quickly.
And just finally, how do you think investors will react to the plans that BP have announced to scale back on its investments?
Well, I think they should be very pleased because we know the bad news in BP. They've got the problems with Rosneft. They've got the problems with Macondo in the Gulf of Mexico. These are all well known about. They've made a firm commitment to the dividend where, there had been some suggestions that they may waver on that. Now, that suggests to me that the dividend to investors should be safe because they can always borrow a little bit more just to keep the equity investor happy in the meantime.
And that was David Battersby from Redmayne Bentley. Well, for now, we can take a look at the financial markets with Brian Torah from stockbrokers JM Finn. Let's get the latest snapshot of what's been happening. So, Brian, what impact did those results from BP have on the FTSE in particular? Because it was a pretty good day for stocks overall, wasn't it?
It was indeed, and the BP share price did rise quite sharply initially, which helped the market. It did drift back a little as the day went on, and as a result they weren't part of the top 10 risers at the end of the day, but it was still a particularly good day for the FTSE 100. It came to within 1% of its all-time high. Remember, that was back at the end of 1999, a very long time ago, though the market did drift back a little towards the close.
And also another story that has been closely watched today is this fine for Standard & Poor's, the rating agency. A fine, a really big one, come from the US Justice Department. What's this about?
This goes back to the financial collapse of 2007-2008. It all started with a number of what were called CDOs, or collateralized debt obligations, which basically aggregated mortgages into a financial product which were then sold. The problem was that a number of ratings agencies, like Standard & Poor's, gave them AAA ratings. What they've admitted is that this was not right, and although they're saying that no law was broken, they've nevertheless settled an awful lot of legal cases by paying a hefty amount to the American authorities. OK, and also
in America, many investors are waiting to see what the Federal Reserve will do in the coming months as far as interest rates are concerned. But in Australia, there has been a decision, hasn't there?
There has. They've lowered interest rates to a record low, 2.25%. Also in India, interestingly, interest rates which were expected to rise were kept on hold, but they're 7.75%. It only goes to show, with us at 0.5%, with Australia at 2.25% and 7.75% in India, there's quite a range of options around the world. OK,
Brian Torah from JM Finn, thank you very much for talking to us. Let's get the latest numbers now from the financial markets. And in London, the 100 share index is up 1.3% at 68.72. And in New York, the Dow is up 0.9% at 17,516. You're listening to World Business Report from the BBC World Service. Still to come, taking a bite out of a bar. Why confectioners are shrinking the sweet stuff to make more of a profit.
I think it's unethical because you're getting less chocolate for more money.
Now, imagine not being able to get a formal job, open a bank account, own a house or even get married. Well, that's the reality for more than 10 million people around the world who are classified as stateless, people without a nationality. Close to 1 million of them live in the Ivory Coast. The BBC's Tamsin Ford reports from Kupela-Neboafle, in the centre of the country.
Abel Kone spreads out coffee beans to dry on a tarpaulin under the sun. The 38-year-old farmer was born here, but he wasn't allowed to go to school. He's not allowed to drive, he's not allowed to vote. In fact, officially, Kone doesn't exist.
If you don't have any papers, you can't have a business, you can't travel. It's really difficult. You can't do anything without papers. Everyone needs to see your identity. If you don't have papers, who are you? Who are you?
He says he wants a normal life, a wife and children, but without an identity, he says it's impossible.
To have a wife and a child, I need my identity. Without papers, I can't find a wife. And how are the children going to go to school? They will demand papers. If you don't have them, what will the child do? Their life won't be so good.
It's the same situation for Kone's neighbour, Lati Watara, also a farmer. It means neither of them legally owns their farms.
The problem for my farm is that you need an identity card to say that belongs to Lati. It's the law. To say that belongs to me, you need papers. If you don't have identity papers, who does the land belong to?
Ivory Coast is a country of migrants. But a 1972 law states Ivorian citizenship can only be won if you can prove one parent is Ivorian. That's impossible for families of the thousands who came here in the 50s and 60s to work the land. It meant their children became stateless too, along with their children and their grandchildren. I'm just sitting under a wooden canopy here in the centre with some of the women from the village. Out of 7 of them here, 5 have no proof of nationality. They've told me the biggest problem is it makes them feel like prisoners in their own country. Every time they leave the village, they have to pay the police to pass. It means starting any sort of business, that money desperately eats into their profits. But things are beginning to change. In October 2013, a new law came in allowing people to declare their nationality rather than prove it. More than 50,000 people have so far come forward, but many, like Kone and Ouattara, haven't even heard of it. Mohamed Touré is the Ivory Coast representative for the United Nations Refugee Agency.
We are talking about people who are in remote places, in remote villages where access to all means of communication are not very well known to many of them. So in a way, one of the biggest challenges that we are facing is just to be sure that this information will reach the people who are in need of that.
But it's not just offspring of immigrants who are left without an identity. Orphans are stateless too.
So we are talking about almost 300,000 kids who were born of unknown parents who are stateless.
New generations of stateless people are being born here every day. Children with no access to public services. And people like Abel Kone living like a ghost in the community.
If I had my papers, I would have good health. I can win my life back. But without them, what can I do? Who are you? You're like an animal.
That was the BBC's Tamazin Ford reporting. You're listening to the BBC World Service, the world's radio station, and it's hello to our listeners in Prague on 101.1 FM, and good evening to you in Delhi, listening on medium wave 1413 kilohertz.
You're sweet like chocolate, boy. Sweet like chocolate. You bring me so much joy.
All the best things come in small packages, that's the old saying, but as far as chocolate is concerned, plenty of people don't think that's the case, including me. The bigger the bar, the better. There's been quite a big consumer backlash in Australia over the last few days after shoppers noticed that the manufacturer Cadbury's had shrunk the size of its family-sized chocolate bar. And so-called shrinkflation, it appears, is happening all over the world. Here in the UK, it's been a quest of diminishing returns for some shoppers. Our reporter Katie Hall went out to investigate.
Well, we're already getting that, aren't we, with the Cadbury's cream eggs. Instead of 6 in a box, there's only 5 in a box. So it's already happening here anyway. We're just not being told of it.
And what do you think about it?
Well, it's better for us healthy-wise, but less. If you wanted better quality chocolate, we're always going to get less, aren't we?
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous. Like, they're only after profits. With the Freddos, they charged like 5 or 10p before, and now they're charging like 20p per Freddo, and it's just all for profit now.
I think it's unethical.
Why do you think it's unethical?
Because you're getting less chocolate for more money.
And would you prefer to spend a little bit more and get more chocolate again, or would you rather have the...
I'd rather say to spend the same amount and have the same amount of chocolate.
I probably still would buy Cadbury's because I still prefer it, but you'd feel a bit hard done by for a bit and then would notice it after that, after the first couple of bars, I'd say.
So it seems to happen all the time where they reduce the actual size. It's almost to try and fool you into thinking that it's the same, and it is obviously just related to profits.
And the mysterious shrinking chocolate bar is not due to that famous chocolatier Willy Wonka's magic. According to Harry Wallop, consumer expert at Britain's Daily Telegraph, companies are blaming the volatility of commodity prices.
Cocoa prices spiked last year, bizarrely because of the Ebola crisis in West Africa, which is the largest area of cocoa production. But it was a temporary spike, and cocoa prices have subsequently fallen. And if we look at a bar of chocolate, in fact, there's all sorts of things that go into it, not just cocoa. It's a lot of milk, and milk prices are unbelievably low at the moment. There's a lot of sugar, and sugar prices are on the way down. And the biggest commodity that goes into all packaged goods is oil derived. It's the actual packaging itself, and it's the distribution, and it's the manufacturing costs, and they are all related to the price of oil. Oil is on the way down.
So with the price of oil on the way down, you believe that perhaps these companies aren't justified in putting up their prices, and instead they're just trying to trim their product to boost their profits?
It's as simple as that. This is a profit-protecting exercise on the part of the manufacturers.
It's not just Cadbury's, is it? Because we've heard as well that Nestlé, for example, has reduced the size of its Quality Street.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Nearly all consumer product companies are doing this. The big boys and the little ones, be it Kraft, be it Unilever, be it Procter & Gamble. There's furniture polish, children's nappies, tins of tuna. Anything you can think of has been shrunk in size in recent years. And there's a good reason for this, because consumers are, bizarrely, more accepting of smaller pack sizes, mostly because they don't notice it, I might add, than rising prices, which they tend to notice. And also, because of the rise of discounters all around the world, particularly the pound shops or the dollar stores, people have become obsessed by certain price points. So if you take Christmas chocolates, for instance, in those tins, be it Quality Street in Britain, that is £5. It has been £5 for a long time. Consumers will notice when a supermarket puts it up to £5.20 or £5.30. So it's a lot easier to ask the manufacturer to take a few chocolates out of it and keep it at £5 than increase the price.
So do you think the old adage, all good things come in smaller packages, really rings true then for consumers? They much prefer small rather than pricier.
Well, I think they're less noticing of smaller pack sizes, and they would kick up an almighty fuss if prices rose as quickly as the pack sizes were shrinking.
But as far as you're concerned, with the oil price so much lower than this time last year, chocolate should be less expensive, and we should be getting more of it.
I think it's time for these shrinking pack sizes, which have been going on for quite a few years. It's a time for it to stop. Come on. There is no reason for consumer products to be quite reduced as they are at the moment.
That was Harry Wallop, consumer expert from the Daily Telegraph, talking about the mysterious shrinking chocolate bar. That's all from World Business Report, and don't forget our sister programme, Business Matters, which goes out at 1 GMT. We'll be discussing all these stories and much more with our guests from around the globe. Until then, goodbye.
You've been listening to World Business Report from the BBC World Service. For more news and analysis, download Business Matters, our daily hour-long mix of current affairs and debate, published at breakfast time in Asia and Europe. We debate key trends in the worlds of work, politics, technology and the environment. Find it at bbc.com/podcasts. You can also follow us and get our latest audio at twitter.com/BBC World Biz, and talk to us on Facebook at facebook.com/BBC Business.
Of last year has now edged to the top of the polls with their slogan, Si se puede, yes we can. At the weekend, tens of thousands of Spaniards came out onto the streets of Madrid to support its uncompromising message against austerity and corruption in Spanish politics. My colleague John Bithry spoke to the international spokesperson for Podemos, Pablo Bustindi, and asked him if Syriza's victory in Greece would help propel his party to electoral success.
Well, we have celebrated Syriza's victory, not simply for what it represents in terms of Greek politics for the Greek people, but because we believe it can inaugurate
people in Ivory Coast who officially don't exist.
If I had my papers, I would have good health. I can win my life back. But without them, what can I do? Who are you? You're like an animal.
That's all coming up. It's a movement that's spreading across Europe. From Portugal to Spain, from Italy to Greece, an increasing number of people seem determined to throw off the straitjacket of austerity. The Greeks have voted in the anti-austerity party Syriza. Its government is now trying to persuade international lenders to renegotiate its massive €320 billion debt burden. Meanwhile, in Spain, Podemos, a party that didn't even exist until the beginning of
a new political cycle in Europe. The austerity policies, they are not only unfair, they are inefficient. They have failed. So it is time to talk, it is time to sit down, and it is time to explore alternatives.
So you're confident that Syriza can solve all the problems of the Greek economy by not talking to the Troika, by throwing out austerity in Greece?
Absolutely not. I think Syriza has been very honest during the campaign, and Tsipras has been very honest with his people. The future is very complex. There will be a lot of difficulties and problems. We are in big trouble because of the policies that have taken us here, and we understand that the challenges are huge. But in the history of Europe, every single time that we have faced difficulties such as those that we are living in these days, we have solved them politically. We believe in building an alternative that will be democratic and that will bring back prosperity to the citizens of Europe.
So are you saying that Spain has not been electing democratically elected governments over the past few years to solve the crisis there?
Of course, we have been electing governments democratically, but the problem comes afterwards, when the representatives of the people who have been democratically elected, left-wing or right-wing, they tell their voters from day one after they are elected that they cannot apply their electoral programs because there is no alternatives, because there is no other option than applying policies that 5 years...
You're listening to the download edition of World Business Report. On Tuesday, the 3rd of February, I'm Susanna Streeter. The Spanish political party hoping to repeat what's happened in Greece.
The austerity policies, they are not only unfair, they are inefficient. They have failed. So it is time to talk, it is time to sit down, and it is time to explore alternatives.
But could there be a backlash against countries trying to renegotiate their debts? Plus, BP says it's scaling back its exploration plans because of the lower oil price.
All the oil majors are not in agreement as to where they think the oil price is going to be in the short term. I think BP is probably of the more negative.
And the 1 million